Okay, good morning. This is Ed Morales, Chief Marketing Innovation Officer for the Pinnacle Group. We are particularly excited again this morning to bring you another edition of Next Level Advisor. Particularly pleased this morning to welcome our guest. He is a friend, business colleague. We've been together for many years, and that's Jason Borek. Jason is our Chief Growth Officer. So I refer to him as Jay for the audience. So you're going to hear me call him Jay, not Jason. But Jay, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning, brother. How are you?
It's good to be with you, man. It's good to be with you. So
Always.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So this morning, Jay, we're going to talk about certainly as a growth officer. There's a lot of responsibilities you have, but one of the key responsibilities and oversight that you have is around this term, or what we have as a platform division, is the advanced planning division. So we wanted to spend a little time with that to really kind of explore what is advanced planning, Jay, from your perspective. And we want to talk a little bit about that, and then talk about some of the things that you see that are just priorities for 2024 with the landscape that's happening with legislation, what's happening with taxes, just all of the things that are out there. So why don't we talk at first, what is advanced planning from your perspective? And let's kind of talk about some of the key areas that you see that are going to be front of mind for you and front of mind for the team that you have around you.
Well, let me just say this. I think as with a lot of terms in our industry, Ed, right? Like advanced planning is really kind of it's relative to the environment, the relationship the advisor has with their client. So I think it's in this universe, what we're talking about now in 2024 is wealth transfer, right? So this is like the foundational component of what we would call advanced planning. But I think really it's all relative, depending on kind of what really are the concerns of the client, and where we get into much more comprehensive discussions about planning for the client. So I don't think there's a clear way to define it, right? It's kind of like if you look at one of the buzzwords today in the industry, which is family office services, right? So define family office. What does that actually mean? Is it ultra high net worth? Is it bill pay? Is it, and I think if you ask that question to 100 different financial advisors, you're going to get 100 different answers. The same way that you're going to get that same type of response from me or from somebody that's sitting in our role in supportive advisors, where, what is that? Define advanced planning. Well, advanced planning is the need of the client at the time that the advisor's having a conversation with the client. So I think foundationally, obviously, we're going to be talking about wealth transfer because of where we're going. I mean, we have a sunset, and just like has happened over the past 30 years, this is the estate tax is a political football, and so that political football has created a lot of discussion, obviously, because we're getting to a place where exclusion and gift taxes are going to dramatically reduce. So you're taking a exclusion today that might affect, call it 300,000 households in the United States, and in 2026 it's going to affect 3.2 million households in the United States because of the lowering of that exclusion. So clearly this is a place where we have to put some focus, and that kind of then branches off into a multitude of conversations, whether it be wealth transfer, legacy planning, or business planning. So I'm pretty careful to try to define that, because the definition from a Pinnacle perspective, from where we sit, the definition of advanced planning is really the need of the advisor's client, right? And then because each of those is going to take on its own universe and definition based on the advisor and where they do business, if that makes sense. So I hate to not be totally specific about it, but the reality is there is no specific answer to that.
Yeah, I love that how you refer to that, Jay, because even the correlation you brought to family office, these are terms that our advisors and I would say clients get exposed to, and they hear it. It is marketed, it is publicized. So I appreciate your candor, because it's clear that it can mean a lot of different things. But what's most specific, if I heard you correctly, is how this really benefits the client, and not getting lost in the terms, but more in exactly specific what planning is necessary as it relates to. And you mentioned wealth transfer. So let's talk a little bit about wealth transfer in 2024. And from that perspective, I know that you've created a team around that. I don't know what that actually means. Maybe talk to the audience about the creation of a team around wealth transfer and why is this so important? What's happening? Specifically, you mentioned about the sunset in 2026, but why the sense of urgency right now with wealth transfer and the need for you to have culminated and created a team to do that? What does that team do? So let's
Well,
talk
let's
about that.
yeah. I mean, first and foremost, the urgency is just simply based on capacity. Right. So if you talk to, and if your advisors talk to, or if any of you talk to anybody that's here listening, talk to any attorney that's in the legacy planning, estate planning universe, right? What those attorneys are going to tell you is that their capacity is limited. So when we have headlines like we have a significant a change in the current tax law, which is really just based on at this point, just based on the exclusion, right? Like what so when you have that happen, now we have this feed into the media. There's been all this dialogue and conversation about it, and so it creates this almost kind of like a hysteria or panic around getting this done. Not only does this open up from a liquidity perspective, again, like I said, about 3 million households as compared to 300,000 households when we were talking about 12.5 million, down to 6.5 or 6.9, where the specifics are, where it's going to sunset to. But when you talk to, like, for example, I think you talk to Andy Winehouse, who's part of our wealth transfer team, and Andy, who is also a practicing attorney, he's a professor of law at Washington University. But what Andy says is, I'm going to get to a place where I'm going to have to lock myself in my office in my attic and not talk to anybody, because I'm going to have so many clients and just so much capacity of work that I can't handle it. Same kind of thing if Marshall Stevens is on the business valuation side. If you talk to Mark Santasiero, who's the CEO of Marshall Stevens, he's going to tell you that valuation discount work that they're doing and the valuation work that they're doing, you get to a point of no return. In other words, where the volumes just get to a place where the work can't be done prior to the change in law, right? And so that's kind of the urgency behind it, right? Because what's happening is this is like almost like a snowball effect, right? The conversation in the media begins, it starts, we know where we're going. All of a sudden now, all the periodicals, all the media in the financial services sector are speaking about it. This elevates this urgency from a client's perspective that creates this capacity issue, just simply to be able to get the planning done by the time we get to 2026. So that's the urgency behind it. And so coordinating and pulling together a team of people and a team of resources has been, obviously paramount for us. We support primarily the financial advisor that does not sell insurance as their primary means of revenue. And so by supporting that group, what we've tried to do is bring together or curate a elegant platform of support in relationships that have absolutely nothing to do with the insurance industry, but have to do with the planning. So we talk about a partnership with Holland & Knight. We talk about a partnership with Marshall Stevens. We talk about a partnership with Whipley, with Andy Winehouse, for example, where we're dealing with folks that are not necessarily in the insurance business, so that every conversation isn't a hammer looking for a nail, right? What we want to do is the planning first, and then just trust by bringing that value to the advisor and putting that team in front of the advisor that, the result is revenue is always going to follow that, but we want to just bring value to the advisor first. That makes sense.
Really, it does make sense, Jason. And I think it's really interesting as you're mentioning this lineup of these, if you will, I'll just call them strategic partners that have kind of put together these teams. And to me, listening to that seems somewhat unique, that they're not necessarily there's an affiliation with the firm as a strategic partner, but not necessarily employed or part of that. So what was the reasoning on that when you were formulating? What that's a really
Oh yeah,
interesting.
that is by design, Ed. I mean, that's by design because what we saw is this need to kind of flip our industry on its head, and so this might, for those that are in the insurance industry, might ruffle some feathers. For those that are in the wealth management space and the financial advisory space, they're probably sitting back on, finally somebody's listening. But so our universe has really been a hammer looking for a nail. This is terminology that I use all the time when I'm engaging a new financial institution or a new registered investment advisor or a new registered investment advisory firm. And so that's really why it's been oil and water in our industry. We have chosen a marketplace where 80% of the people that do business with Pinnacle do not sell insurance as their primary means of revenue. So, the challenge you have is that when you're transactionally based, and you're dealing with a fiduciary like an RIA, the function, the language, the terminology, the engagement is not in alignment culturally with the marketplace that you're trying to serve, which is really what the insurance industry hasn't figured out. So by design, we've curated and created these strategic partnerships because I didn't want to employ an advanced markets attorney, for example, because our ultimately our business earns revenue, makes revenue from a product being sold, right? And so
Right.
if I employ an advanced markets attorney, then every conversation he has with an advisor is going to be a hammer looking for a nail. It's going to be somebody trying to push to a transaction. And so, we decided, a long time ago that the way to approach this is to curate a network of strategic partnerships, relationships that are at the top of their industry, that aren't necessarily in the insurance space, that can engage the advisor, engage the advisor's client, get the planning done. And then by doing that, we trust that value to the advisor and their client is going to ultimately lead to revenue in some capacity. And so it's a very different mindset. So you'll see that with regard to kind of how we structured the platform, because we feel like it's necessary. I mean, our industry's done a great job of making a lot of nice shiny brochures and patting people on the back and sending them off into a universe that they don't understand. And so, for us, it's kind of like, number one, if you're going to be a part or a strategic partnership of the Pinnacle Group, and we're going to deliver that partnership to the advisor, you have to be client facing. You have to be willing to engage the advisor and their client. There has to be this bridge to implementation. But then also it has to be done through education, right? It has to be done and delivered through true planning expertise that really is not focused on whether or not we actually get to a transaction, but is focused more on the client's objectives and achieving those objectives in for lack of a better way to describe it, in a more elegant way, right? Because that's really what resonates in the financial advisory community, the registered investment advisory community, which, I think our industry's got a long way to go in trying to build that bridge between the delivery of insurance product and planning to the financial advisory or wealth management community, which again has been oil and water. And so we've been committed over the last 15 years to build an organization that is figuring that out. And so we do that by really listening and learning and understanding the businesses that we support, and not trying to drive down to a product positioning or transaction. And it's been fruitful for us in that space.
There are three things I wrote down there, Jay, listening to you, that number one, the formation of the teams that have been put together. First mine as a priority, what you established is obviously being is really looking at the client first. So being customer first is what I heard, client first. Secondly, I heard is maintaining a philosophy that almost adhered to was around objectivity. So being objective. So really being objective, not with kind of like being shackled in one ear or the other and so forth, but client first, objectivity. And something else that you noted is also to be able to provide, yes, consultation, but to take your team and to be able to have them meet with the clients, to be part of the actual kind of multidiscipline approach that a financial professional may have, to the extent that they would be available to actually meet with clients. And that those three things to themselves may not be all that exceptional, but putting those three things together, that appears to me to be very unique, right? That's what you spoke to.
Look, I look at a relationship and a partnership like Marshall Stevens as a really great example of that. And so, one of the things that I try to do with our organization is to utilize some of these partnerships myself. And I do that so that I have a thorough understanding of how to deliver that to our end distribution, whether it be to our sales directors or out to our financial institutions. And of course, business valuation and valuation in total really is foundational to this planning conversation. So from my perspective, I said, look, we got to find a relationship that can consult, right? That gets deep into these discussions and that can do it in an objective way, so that it's not, again, trying to push to a transaction. So what Marshall Stevens does, they have MS Capital, which is their investment banking arm. So if the business owner, for example, wants to take the business to market, they have the capability of doing that. But the engagement, there's a depth to it. I brought them into a company that I used to run years ago, just to see how it would work, how the partnership would work. Because they come in and they do a calculation of value. Well, in this instance, this company was started in an apartment in Jacksonville Beach with three brothers, and now employs 3,000 people. And so, the ownership was ready to take some money off the table, and this was part of the foundational discussion. So I brought Marshall Stevens to do a calculation of value, like a high end, engagement just on the front side of this, to see how does this relationship work. The conversation went well beyond business valuation, right? So first of all, you have an objective platform that is presenting kind of how the value is addressed in the marketplace. So the company was worth about $55 million on paper. But there were things like, the existing CEO who had no equity and no employment contract. So on paper, the business was worth $55 million, but in practical terms, it was worth nothing. And we're having this conversation, by the way, with the leadership of Marshall Stevens, their CEO, one of their key executives, and the leadership of the business, myself, Tom Worthington, one of our advanced planning guys. So we're all sitting at the table here having this planning discussion, and it transcended the value of the business and got into more of kind of actually even the tactics of running the business. How do, because we may get a valuation initially, right? A calculation of value initially, but it may take 2 years to get the business ready, right? To get the business fully ready. And so there is a bunch of consulting resource that they bring to the table to try to maximize that value for the business owner. Again, what does any of this have to do with sale of insurance? Absolutely nothing. Now, what happened out of this discussion was, obviously, we negotiated some equity for the existing CEO, who was the individual that was driving kind of the culture of the firm, had all the client relationships. And so, if I have a business that's worth $55 million on paper, but I have a CEO who is the business, who has absolutely no equity and no employment contract, in practical terms, I have a company that's worth nothing. So we negotiated him equity in the firm. Then what came from that? Obviously, there was some life insurance sold because of the new equity component. There was a buy-sell agreement, and those pieces were discussed. There was an executive benefits arrangement that was put into place. So there's a multitude of planning things that come behind that value. But again, it all starts with this objective solution and these resources that come down to consult with the client. It's an unmatched value to the advisor, right? Because what they're bringing is this level of expertise, and it's done again through an objective consulting platform as opposed to kind of a sales-driven platform, right? Because that's really what the insurance industry has to get away from. Got to understand that this is about bringing value to the advisor, bringing value to the institution, bringing value to the client, right? Educate and objective and bring the right kind of planning resource, and then just trust by doing that there will be revenue to follow it. But that requires a lot of discipline and a lot of sacrifices in organization, which which is really kind of something we committed to about 10 years ago as we really entered into the financial advisory space.
So Jay, let's as we conclude here, let's talk. Just could you talk about with this team, how they execute, the objectivity is there. So how does an advisor? How would you see? Speaking to the audience, we got advisors on the line here. How do they engage with your team? What would be, in very simple terms, what would that experience look like?
Well, first and foremost, there's going to be somebody that is a part of the relationship that will be kind of the point person for the advisor, right? And so that's necessary because our network of resources is pretty expansive, and so clearly we're not going to ever put it on the advisor to have to navigate that universe, right? So there will be an individual, any number of individuals within our organization, depending on the market segment, that's going to support that advisor, and really start by gathering the information about the specific circumstance, the client. And that data gathering is going to be done via dialogue and conversation. Depending on how the advisor. The one thing that you'll understand is we're outside in, so we're not going to come to the advisor and say, okay, here's how we do things, so jam this into your practice. Mm-hmm. Right? We want to be additive and not invasive. It's the language I use a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And so, our industry has forever been invasive to the financial advisory community. So we're going to come in and understand, number one, our relationship folks, our sales directors, they're going to understand how the advisor does business. Mm. How does the advisor do business? How do they transform or gather information? We're going to gather that data. And once we have that, then it's going to be really a team of people that gets brought together to consult around that specific client. Understand what direction do we need to take this discussion based on client's concern, client need, client circumstance. But it all starts with that data gathering, and it really all starts with relationship at the point, right? So with one of our sales directors to help the advisor gather that data, and then navigate our universe of advanced markets resources based on kind of some of the conversation. And typically those discussions are happening amongst a group of people. So it might be our sales director, it might be some folks on the advanced markets team like Kent Griffin or Don Rosborough or Tom Worthington or some other folks that will come in and just kind of go over the data that the advisor has, and then from there we would determine what direction to take that conversation and what resources necessary. For example, if we have a $50 million client. We just had an example up in Minnesota where we had an advisor come to us and say, I need an attorney. My client needs an attorney that specializes in aviation contract law. Right. And so from that context, we went to Holland and Knight. Obviously, they identified that. And this was a client that's worth $55 million. And we brought that resource and relationship to the table. But it all starts with an initial discussion with the advisor and the relationship, the person that's engaged in the relationship on our end, to understand the needs of the client and the concerns of the client, and gathering the data so that we can then determine where to take this conversation from a planning perspective.
Jay, that's terrific. I mean, again, there are three things that I'm taking away from that, and for the audience, it is a strong adherence to actually developing a relationship. That was one of the first things with that, and then kind of the need to get information, as you refer to data gathering, and then from that, just depending on what the need is, what the client need may be, and what the advisor is looking to accomplish, it's kind of like the formation of getting the right team. So it sounds like the relationship manager in this regard would actually navigate. They use the term navigate. Would navigate to have the right team, the right resource, specific, and it seems like it's pretty vast. You just gave an example of an advisor calling in pursuit of things around aviation law. So whatever the ask may be, what your team is doing here is really trying to identify specifically what is going to be the right resource, how that can be delivered, and to provide that directly to the client. So that is, I think it's excellent. I think you've kind of shared with us what are some of the differentiators and so forth. So we're coming up here to the time frame here, Jay. I just want to first and foremost thank you. I know we're going to be on again and talking about this because there's a lot that's happening right now, specifically as you as a growth officer and what you see for 2024, and just your commentary around wealth transfer, business valuation, valuation discounts. So we'll probably spend some more time doing a deep dive in some of the specifics there. But listen, brother, it was great being with you. Thank you you got a lot to do. So I'm going to let you go.
It's great seeing you, brother. Appreciate you, man. Talk to you guys soon.
Take care.